Hi, we have Julie Connor today with the Houston chapter of the Nonfiction Authors Association. Red O'Loughlin here, and I'm going to be chatting with Julie today. The first of two interviews. The first one's just going to be about Julie Connor, and she has a remarkable story of her life. It's just one of those things that you would love to find somebody like this and to spend several hours just chatting with. But we don't have that much time, but we are going to get a good snapshot of who Julie is. So Julie, please tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, whatever you think is important. This part of the interview is before you started writing your book, and so it gives us a chance to know Julie Connor up close and personal, as they used to say in the Olympics.
I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. I say in Baton Rouge, but actually I grew up outside of the city limits of Baton Rouge on a plantation on the Mississippi River. It's called Longwood Plantation. My family, the Gianellonis, had lived there since the 1870s or so. And my father was a rancher. He had Aberdeen Angus cattle, and we were very much a country family. I grew up in 4-H, showing cattle and sheep and horses at livestock competitions, and we were the second to last stop on the school board, the school bus route. Baton Rouge, in fact, Louisiana is kind of unusual that all schools, Catholic, parochial, and private, are serviced by public sector entities such as school buses and so forth. There's kind of interesting little story there. My mother used to love telling this. At one point, the governor, I guess, announced that services were no longer going to be provided to parochial schools. So the bishop had a letter read at the pulpits the next Sunday and said, all Catholics should go and register your children at public schools. Well, the very next week, that same week, the governor said, okay, we're going to rescind that order, because obviously all these thousands and thousands and thousands of children who'd been at Catholic schools now went to register for public schools. Anyway, my point is we were way outside the city limits, and I grew up in the country. One of my strange Twilight Zone moments was when I went back to Baton Rouge after being overseas many years, and I saw that the place where I had grown up, which was just pasture land, was now suburbs, was now residential developments for Baton Rouge. It was quite a strange feeling. What else can I tell you about my background? As I said, my family is longtime Louisiana residents. A lot of times people say, oh, your name is Gianelloni. When did your relatives come over? Or how long have they been here? Or do you speak Italian? And I have to say, well, they've been in the United States for about 200 years. How long have yours been? And that's just on my father's side. On my mother's side goes even back further. So dealing with the last name Gianelloni has always been an issue for me. And I'm actually probably going to write about this in a book.
Now, you said overseas. How many countries have you been to?
Well, I had 9 overseas postings, which meant I lived there for 2 or 3 years. I also, before I joined the Foreign Service, I lived in Spain, Portugal, and England for extended periods. And how many countries I've been to, I've never really counted them up, but no, I was pretty much all over, except for Africa. I've only done a couple of countries in Africa.
Now, you haven't to mention that you were in some countries overseas, but most of the conversation was about Louisiana, but you have a myriad of experience in the Foreign Service that I don't know if that led to your book being written or if it was part of the inspiration or whatever, but it's one of those things that I find fascinating about you.
Yeah, I sort of fell into a career that I would never have thought I was going to take at 20 or 22. But I did go overseas on my own and lived first in Portugal and then Spain. And that was kind of the basis for making me know that I did want to have a job that involved an overseas aspect. And it took me several more years to figure out what that was going to be, besides which joining the Foreign Service is not just saying, I want to join. You have to go through a rigorous process. So it took me 2 years before I was offered a job. And that started my Foreign Service career in 1981. And I was a Foreign Service officer for 33 years.
Wow.
So as I said, I served in 9 different countries or postings overseas. It was actually 7 different countries. But of course, when you're in a country, then you travel all around the area around it. So I've pretty much been around the globe.
And when did you first find out you actually had a skill or a talent for writing?
I was a child. They made us do writing assignments, and I always was praised, and my little assignments would be put in the school newsletter, and I don't know, I've always known I could write.
Authors and genres, do you have any that are favorite that you really and truly enjoy, or maybe you've changed over time as the process goes?
Well, for school, of course, I read a lot of straight literature, good literature, British literature, American literature, and that was one of my majors in college too. So I read a lot of good books. And I was also a double major in history, so that required a lot of reading books about history, which I loved. However, once I got into my career, it was very stressful and very tense. And I found when I got home at night, the little time I had off, I just couldn't face a heavy book. So I started reading mysteries, and I just fell in love with mysteries, and I've read a lot of mysteries over the year. And sometimes I'll pick up a highly recommended good literature book or read a history book, but probably after joining the Foreign Service, the thing I read most was mysteries. And so, of course, what I really loved was historical mysteries or mysteries based overseas. So like there's a mystery series based in Singapore that I love and so forth, those kinds of mysteries. But anyway, I pretty much am a voracious reader. Since we've been on this coronavirus lockdown, I've probably read 30 books.
Like Agatha Christie?
Sorry?
Like Agatha Christie mysteries?
Oh, those are way in the past. No, I read more contemporary.
Contemporary, okay. What do you do for fun nowadays?
Well, for many years, starting when I was in the Foreign Service, I played bridge, but I've kind of tapered off on that. There's not time. Bridge is a very time-consuming occupation if you really do it. I got to be a live master, which was kind of my goal for a while, and I enjoyed going away from town, wherever I was living, to tournaments and meeting people and making friends. But now, all that energy that I put into bridge for a while is going to writing, so I just don't have time for bridge anymore.
What did you do to prepare yourself to actually write your first book? What kinds of things did you say, I need to get this done, or I want to get this done before I start? Was there anything that had to be done before you actually started writing?
I wouldn't say that. I always wanted to write after I retired, but once I retired, I found that there were too many other things going on. So travel was one. I had all these ideas about trips I wanted to take when I retired, and I started taking them. And one of those trips was walking the Camino de Santiago. So walking the Camino Santiago led me to the decision, okay, this is the first book I'm going to write. It's about the Camino. I had first read about the Camino many, many years before, but I'd never been able to take that trip. So I took it in retirement, and that led to my book.
And it's ironic, within the NFAA here in Houston, and my wife have walked the Camino de Santiago, and you have. It's kind of unusual to find a very small subset of people. And in reality, you walked it a couple of months before we did. It's very interesting.
Well, the whole Camino is an interesting thing because, and I talk about this in my book, interest in the Camino is exploding. Back when I first heard about it in the late 70s, nobody was walking the Camino de Santiago. Mm-hmm. I read about it in James Michener's book, Iberia. Mm-hmm. And from that time I wanted to do it, although he didn't walk it, he drove it. And so when I finally said, okay, now I can do this, and I started reading a lot of books about it, I realized that most people were walking it, and that's what I decided to do. But the history now, it's like you can't go anywhere without meeting someone who's either walked the Camino or knows someone that's walked the Camino or is interested in walking the Camino. And that is so strange for me that there's so much interest in it nowadays. I'm sorry, my phone is ringing.
Yeah, I belong to the local Camino chapter here. And normally they have a meeting about once every 3 or 4 months or so. And they're on Zoom. I think they're coming up next week with the Zoom meeting to keep their group together. But is there something else I should have asked you about with regard to your personal story, your adventures that you want to share with the audience, our readers, our authors?
Well, I'm really right now thinking about what I want to do for my future as far as a writer. I love nonfiction. Think of myself as a nonfiction writer. I took courses in journalism and I wrote for newspapers and a radio station for a while. But it's clear to me that you get a lot more readership if you do nonfiction. So I'm thinking about writing something that's nonfiction to see how that goes. As I mentioned earlier, I'm thinking about writing a sort of family memoir about the Gianelloni family. I have a lot of book ideas, but we'll see where they go.
Well, I'm going to join you a little bit later on, and we're going to do the author interview from the time that you got inspired to write this book, and then you actually got it written, and then it was physically there in front of you. And I could tell the satisfaction in your face when you actually had it and you were showing it around. So we're going to talk about that one coming up next.
Oh, should we look at the cover before you leave?
I have no problem. If that's what you want to do, let's go. We're going to look at it again later, but let's go ahead and pop it up there real quick.
Let's look at the cover. It's such a...
It has a lot of meaning on the cover. It really does. And
I love this cover.
Yeah.
I just love this cover.
We can go over each of those things when we talk about the author's book, but that is a very interesting cover for anybody who's walked it, because each of those things means something.
Right.
I'm going to go ahead and conclude this particular one, and we're going to start back up again in a little bit.
Thanks, Red.